Jack Morrison stood in front of the tall mirror in his spacious bedroom, illuminated by the soft light of the morning sun streaming through the translucent curtains. His gaze scrutinized the reflection, which seemed almost alien. Instead of the familiar image of a successful businessman in an expensive suit, there stood before him a man he barely recognized. He was wearing worn blue jeans, faded in places and with light scuffs on the knees. Jack ran his hand over the rough fabric, feeling the unfamiliar texture. These jeans were strikingly different from his usual fine wool-tailored pants. His upper body was encased in a simple work shirt of heavy cotton, the color of burnt khaki. The sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, exposing his arms, which still showed a light tan from a recent vacation in the Maldives. Jack tugged at the shirt, trying to get used to the stiff collar scratching his neck. He wore a tattered baseball cap with the logo of the local baseball team on it. The visor was slightly crooked, and the fabric was frayed at the folds, giving the impression that the cap had been worn for years. Jack adjusted it, feeling awkward. He hadn't worn headgear like that since college. He took a step back, assessing the overall look. The man in the mirror looked like a typical construction worker, tired, a little shabby, but ready for a hard day's work. Nothing in his appearance gave him away as a millionaire and owner of a large hotel chain. This transformation was necessary. Something was going on at the construction site of his new hotel, something not good, and he had to find out what it was. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that he would have to work hard physically and be constantly on guard, but he was up for the challenge. Emily, his wife, entered the room and stopped in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest. Her face expressed a mixture of concern and incomprehension. "Jack," she began, her voice shaking with restrained emotion, "are you really sure this is necessary?" Jack turned to her, trying to smile, but the smile came out strained. "Emily, darling, we've already discussed this. It's the only way to find out the truth." Emily stepped closer, her heels tapping softly on the parquet floor. She stopped next to her husband, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But why you? We have a whole staff of managers who could handle this. Jack, it's dangerous." Jack took a deep breath, covering her hand with his. "Because I can't trust anyone, Emily. If there really is something foul going on out there, who knows how deep it's gotten into our company? I have to see for myself." Emily stepped back to the window, looking out at the city spread out below. "What about the children, Jack? What am I going to tell them? That their father decided to play detective?" Jack came up behind her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Tell them Dad's away on a business trip. It's not far from the truth, is it?" Emily turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "What if something happens? If you get exposed? Jack, you're not some secret agent. You're a businessman." "Emily," Jack took her hands in his, looking her straight in the eyes, "I understand your concerns, but understand mine too. This hotel isn't just another business project. It's a legacy I want to leave to our children, and if there's any shenanigans going on there, I have to stop it." Emily sighed, wiping away a tear. "I know how much this project means to you, but can't you find another way? Maybe hire a private investigator?" Jack shook his head. "No, dear. A private investigator might scare off the people behind it. I need to blend in, become my own man. It's the only way I can find out the truth." "What about your duties here? The company can't be without leadership," Emily objected. Jack smiled, this time genuinely. "That's what I have you for, my clever girl. You'll do a fine job of running things in my absence. I trust you completely." Emily couldn't hold back a smile. "Flatterer, but you're right. I can handle it. It's just, Jack, I'm so scared for you." Jack wrapped his arms around his wife, pulling her tightly against him. "I know you are, darling, but believe me, I'll be extremely careful. It's only for a few weeks." Emily pulled away, looking intently at her husband. "Promise me, Jack. Promise me you'll call every night, even if you can't tell me anything." "I promise," Jack replied seriously. "Every night, no exceptions. And if you feel even the slightest danger, you will stop this madness immediately," Emily added. Jack nodded. "Of course. I'm not going to take any unnecessary risks." Emily sighed, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "You know, those clothes look good on you. You look like a real working man." Jack grinned. "Really? And I feel like I'm at a masquerade party." "No, really," Emily smiled weakly. "It's just the hands that give it away, too well groomed for a common laborer." Jack looked at his hands. "Yeah, I didn't think of that. I'll have to work on that." "Jack," Emily said, suddenly serious, "what if your suspicions are confirmed? What if indeed one of our employees is involved in something illegal?" Jack frowned. "Then we'll stop it. At any cost. I won't allow our company to be involved in anything illegal." "Even if it's someone in top management?" Emily asked. "Even if it's my best friend," Jack replied firmly. "The law is the same for everyone." Emily nodded, a look of respect in her eyes. "That's why I married you, Jack Morrison. For your honesty and integrity." Jack smiled, kissing his wife. "And I thought you married me for my irresistible looks." Emily laughed, and the tension in the room eased a little. "Well, that played a part, too." Jack glanced at his watch. "I've got to go, honey. I don't want to be late on my first day." Emily hugged her husband tightly. "Be careful, Jack. Remember that the kids and I are waiting for you at home." "I always remember that," Jack replied seriously. "You're the reason for everything I do." He kissed his wife goodbye, trying to put all his love and promise to return into that kiss. Then, taking a simple gym bag with his belongings, he headed for the door. "Jack," Emily called out to him when he was already in the doorway. He turned around. "Yes, dear." "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Jack felt a lump come up to his throat. He nodded, unable to utter a word, and left the room. As he rode the elevator down, Jack thought about the task ahead of him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He would have to pretend, lie, perhaps even take risks. But he also knew he was doing it for the right cause, for his family, for his employees, for the future of his company. Walking out of the luxurious building where their apartment was located, Jack headed not to his usual expensive car, but to an older pickup truck parked off to the side. It was a vehicle he had bought specifically for his cover. As he got behind the wheel, Jack took one last look at the windows of their apartment. He saw Emily's silhouette watching him. Jack waved at her, then started the engine and drove off. "Well, Jack Morrison," he said to himself as he pulled onto the busy street, "welcome to your new life." Ahead of him was a construction site, new people, and possibly dangerous discoveries. But Jack was ready for anything. For the truth, for justice, for the future he wanted to build for his family and his company. Arriving at the construction site, Jack stood still for a moment, staring at the huge excavation and the workers scurrying back and forth. This was his land, his project, but today he was walking in here as a completely different person. Taking a deep breath, he got out of the car and headed toward the foreman. Mike Donovan, a stout man with a stern look and graying temples, stood studying some blueprints. Jack approached him, trying to look as casual as possible. "Hey, boss," he called out to Mike. "I'm the new guy, Jack Smith. I was told to come to you." Mike looked up from the blueprints, casting Jack an appraising glance. "Ah, yes. I've been informed that a new handyman is arriving today. Any experience in construction?" Jack shook his head, trying to look a little embarrassed. "Honestly, no, but I'm a quick learner and willing to work hard." Mike hummed. "Okay, rookie, you'll start by unloading the materials, over there." He pointed to a truck parked nearby. "Tony will show you what to do." Jack nodded and headed to the designated spot. There he met Tony Ramirez, a young guy of about 25 with a friendly smile and lively brown eyes. "Hi, you must be new here," Tony said, extending his hand. "I'm Tony. Welcome to hell," he grinned. Jack shook his hand, smiling back. "Jack, nice to meet you. Is it that bad here?" Tony shrugged. "Yeah, no, it's not really that bad. It's just that the work is hard, especially for newbies. But you'll get used to it. Come on, I'll show you what to do." Jack spent the next few hours unloading heavy building materials. His hands, unaccustomed to such labor, quickly blistered and his back ached. But he didn't complain, knowing that this was only the beginning of his investigation. During his lunch break, Jack took a seat next to Tony, who had already become something of a guide to him in this new world. "So what brings you here, Jack?" Tony asked, taking a big bite of his sandwich. Jack thought for a moment, remembering his pre-arranged legend. "Well, I lost my old job due to layoffs. Heard it paid well here, so I thought I'd try my luck." Tony nodded. "Yeah, it pays pretty good, especially if you're willing to work overtime. You know, sometimes strange things happen here at night." Jack was wary, but tried not to show his interest. "Really? What kind of strange things?" Tony looked around, making sure no one was overhearing them. "Well, for one, sometimes trucks come by at night, unloading something, but no one knows what. And there's no paperwork on those shipments." "And what? No one asks what those shipments are?" Jack inquired, trying to make his voice sound merely curious rather than suspicious. Tony shrugged. "You know how it is. People are afraid of losing their jobs. Best not to ask too many questions." Jack nodded, mentally making a note to check the night shifts. "Yeah, I understand. What about the boss, Mike? What's he like?" "Mike?" Tony thought for a second. "Tough man, but fair. At least that's how it seems. Keeps things under control, but I'd try not to attract his attention if I were you. He's not too fond of newcomers." After lunch, the work continued. Jack tried to get into all the processes, to observe how the other workers behaved, to listen to the conversations. By the end of the day, he was exhausted physically, but his mind worked actively, analyzing all the information he received. In the evening, sitting in his small rented apartment that he had rented specifically for this case, Jack called Emily. "Hello, darling," he said when she answered. "As promised, I'm calling." "Jack!" Emily could hear the relief in his voice. "How was your first day? Are you okay?" Jack grinned. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just really tired. Turns out physical labor isn't as easy as I thought it would be." "Are you sure you want to keep going?" Emily asked with concern. "Maybe there's another way?" "No, Emily, I have to do this," Jack replied firmly. "I've already heard some strange things. Something is really wrong here, and I intend to find out what it is." After his conversation with his wife, Jack lay awake for a long time, reflecting on the day's events and planning his next steps. He knew that this was only the beginning, and that there were many more discoveries ahead of him. The next morning, Jack awoke at first light, feeling his muscles aching after yesterday's work. He quickly got ready and drove to the construction site, deciding to arrive early to observe the preparations for the workday. When he arrived, the site was already bustling with life. Workers were arriving, machinery humming, preparing for another day of construction. Jack noticed Mike talking earnestly with a woman in a business suit and helmet. Moving closer, Jack heard scraps of their conversation. "Doesn't meet specs," the woman was saying, clearly annoyed. "Mike, you can't just ignore safety standards." Mike looked tense. "Sarah, look, we're on time and on budget. Isn't that what matters?" "The most important thing is safety," Sarah retorted. "I'm not signing those papers until everything is fixed." Noticing Jack approaching, they broke off their conversation. Mike nodded to him, and Sarah gave him a curious look. "Good morning," Jack said hello. "Am I interrupting?" "No, we're just finishing up," Mike said, casting a warning glance at Sarah. "Jack, right? Go to the warehouse. You'll be helping with inventory today." Jack nodded and headed towards the warehouse, but by the edge of his ear he heard Sarah say to Mike, This conversation isn't over. In the warehouse, Jack met Tony, who had already started sorting through the toolboxes. "Hey, new guy," Tony greeted him. "How'd you sleep in your new place?" Jack grinned, rubbing his neck. "Honestly, not so good. Everything hurts after last night." Tony laughed. "Welcome to the world of honest labor, buddy. Don't worry. You'll get used to it in a couple weeks." They started work, and Jack took the moment to ask a few questions. "Listen, Tony," he began, as if in between. "Who was that woman Mike was talking to? She looked pretty angry." Tony looked around, making sure no one could hear them. "That's Sarah Chen, a civil engineer. She's in charge of making sure all the technical standards are met. Very principled, always arguing with Mike over little things." "Little things?" Jack interjected. "Is there such a thing as trivialities in construction?" Tony shrugged. "You know, stuff like codes and regulations. Mike thinks some of them can be bypassed to save time and money, and Sarah's against it." Jack frowned. "That doesn't sound good. Isn't that dangerous?" "Hey, we're just laborers," Tony said, getting a little nervous. "Our job is to follow orders, not discuss the decisions of our superiors." Jack nodded, but mentally made a note to talk to Sarah when he had the chance. The day went on, and Jack tried to absorb every detail, every conversation. During his lunch break, he noticed Sarah sitting alone, studying some blueprints. Deciding this was a good chance, he approached her. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, pointing to the empty seat next to her. Sarah looked up, clearly surprised that someone had decided to join her. "No, sit down," she said after a second's hesitation. Jack sat down and pulled out his sandwich. "I'm Jack, the new guy," he introduced himself. "And I believe you're Sarah. I saw you talking to Mike this morning." Sarah looked at Jack carefully, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Yes, I'm Sarah Chen, the project engineer. And what did you hear from our conversation with Mike?" Jack faltered for a moment, realizing he had to be careful. "Honestly, not much. Something about specifications and safety standards. I'm new to construction, so I didn't understand a lot of it." Sarah sighed, setting the blueprints aside. "Listen, Jack, you're new here, so I'll give you some advice. Keep your eyes open and be careful." "What do you mean?" Jack asked, trying to make his voice sound naive and a little concerned. Sarah looked around, making sure no one was overhearing them. "Strange things are happening at this construction site. Materials that don't meet design specifications, overnight deliveries without paperwork, changes in plans without proper approval. I'm trying to fight it, but what?" Jack backed up the conversation, feeling he was getting close to something important. "But I'm not being listened to," Sarah replied with bitterness in her voice. "Mike thinks I'm too picky about little things. And I believe there are no little things in construction, especially when it comes to people's safety." Jack nodded, listening intently. "I understand your position, but aren't there some authorities you can turn to?" Sarah grinned bitterly. "In theory there are, but in practice, Jack, you're new, so you may not yet understand how things work. Everyone here has their own interests. Some want to save money, some want to make more money. And in the midst of it all, the most important thing gets lost: quality and safety." At that moment, Tony walked up to them holding his lunch. "Hey, Jack." "Oh, hi, Sarah." He looked a little surprised to see them together. "Am I interrupting?" "No, sit down," Sarah replied, though it was obvious she wasn't particularly happy about the interrupted conversation. Tony plopped down next to Jack. "What's the conversation about? I hope Sarah isn't loading you up with her technical terms, Jack?" Sarah threw Tony a sharp look. "I was just explaining to Jack the importance of following building codes. By the way, Tony, you've been working here a long time, haven't you? What do you think of the changes lately?" Tony was visibly nervous. "Well, you know, Sarah, I try to stay out of these things. My job is to follow instructions." Even if those instructions are against safety regulations? Sarah insisted. Look, I'm just a laborer. Tony was starting to get annoyed. I have a family. I need this job. I can't risk my position over some suspicion. Jack decided to intervene, sensing the tension building. Hey guys, let's not fight. We're all here to work, right? Why don't you tell me something about the project? What are we even building? Sarah and Tony looked at each other for a moment, then Sarah replied, It's supposed to be an upscale hotel. 20 floors, luxury rooms, conference rooms, spa. The project is ambitious. And expensive, Tony added. They say the owner is some cool millionaire. Never seen him around here, really. Jack felt his heart race. Really? And what do they say about him? Tony shrugged. Not much, really. Rich guy owns a chain of hotels. I think his name is Morrison or something. Jack tried to keep a nonchalant expression on his face. Interesting. And he never comes to the construction site? Not that I know of, no, Sarah replied. Mike runs things around here. He's the main point of contact between the construction site and the company management. At that moment, the shrill sound of a siren cut through the air, signaling the end of the lunch break. The workers who had been sitting in groups around the construction site began to reluctantly rise, picking up leftover food and empty containers. Tony, a young worker that Jack had become friends with over the past few days, stretched and stood up, shaking the dust off his jeans. Well, time to get back to work, he said, turning to Jack. Listen, you better not be late. Mike doesn't like it when rookies slack off. Jack nodded, feeling the tension that had released him a little during lunch return again. Thanks for the warning, Tony. I'll be careful. Tony looked at Jack carefully. You seem a little tense today. Is everything okay? Jack tried to smile as casually as possible. Yeah, everything's fine. Just a lot of new information to process. Yeah, I understand. Tony nodded. The first few weeks are always the hardest, but you're holding up pretty well for an office plankton. Jack raised an eyebrow in surprise. Office plankton? Tony laughed. Come on, Jack. I can see you're not working class. Your hands are too well groomed for someone who's worked construction all his life. Jack felt a chill run down his back. I just... Relax, Tony patted his shoulder. Your secrets are your secrets. I'm just saying that if you need help or advice, you can count on me. Jack looked at Tony gratefully. Thanks, friend. That means a lot to me. At that moment, Frank, an older worker with a gray mustache, approached them. Hey, youngsters, stop talking. Mike's already looking in our direction, and he doesn't look the friendliest. Jack turned around and saw that Mike was indeed watching them, crossing his arms over his chest. His gaze was cold and suspicious. Damn, Jack muttered. Thanks for the talk, guys. It's been very informative. Tony grinned. You're welcome, rookie. Just try not to draw too much attention to yourself, especially Mike's attention. As Tony and Frank stepped back, Sarah said quietly to Jack, Be careful, Jack, and if you notice anything suspicious, let me know. Jack nodded and headed to his workstation, his head full of new thoughts and suspicions. He realized that he had only begun to uncover the surface of what was going on at this construction site. Jack spent the rest of the day completing various tasks, but his mind kept returning to his conversation with Sarah and Tony. He tried to observe everything going on around him more closely, noting every little thing that might have seemed strange or suspicious. Toward evening, when most of the workers were going home, Jack noticed Mike talking excitedly on the phone, moving away from the others. Jack tried to stealthily move closer so he could hear the conversation. Yeah, I realize the deadline is looming, Mike was saying in a strained voice, but that damn Chen keeps making trouble. She refuses to sign documents. No, I can't just fire her. That would raise suspicion. Yes, I know Mr. Morrison is not happy with the delays. Believe me, I'm doing everything I can. Okay, I get it. There will be another shipment tonight. I'll personally make sure everything goes smoothly. Jack felt his heart beat faster. He had just gotten confirmation of his suspicions about the overnight deliveries. Now he had to find a way to stay at the construction site at night to see for himself. When Mike finished talking and turned around, Jack quickly pretended to be busy working. Mike walked over to him. "Hey, rookie," he called out to Jack. "How's your second day going?" Jack straightened up, trying to look tired but satisfied. "Fine, sir. The work is hard but interesting." Mike nodded, looking at him carefully. "Good. Listen, we need men for the night shift. Any desire to make some extra money?" Jack barely held back a smile. This was the perfect opportunity. "Of course, sir. I'm willing to work as long as it takes." "Good," Mike said. "Then you're welcome to stay. It starts at 10 o'clock at night. And remember, Jack, night work requires a special discretion. You know what I mean?" Jack nodded, trying to look serious. "Yes, sir. I understand." When Mike stepped back, Jack took a deep breath. He knew that tonight could be a pivotal night in his investigation. Now he had to find a way to discreetly document everything that would happen. Night descended on the construction site, shrouding the unfinished hotel building in shadows. Jack, who had been left on the night shift, tried to keep a low profile as he watched. His heart was pounding and his palms were sweating from the exertion. He hid behind a stack of building materials, trying to control his breathing. "Take it easy, Jack," he whispered to himself. "You'll get through this. Just watch and remember." Time stretched agonizingly slow. Jack kept checking the clock on his phone, trying to do so as carefully as possible so the light of the screen wouldn't give away his location. Around midnight, the silence was broken by the sound of an approaching engine. Jack tensed, peering into the darkness. A large, unmarked truck had entered the construction site. Its headlights were off, which further heightened Jack's suspicions. "This is it," he muttered, pulling out his phone and preparing to take a video of what was happening. The truck stopped and the driver, a stout man in dark clothing, jumped out of the cab. He looked around, obviously checking to see if there were any intruders around. "Hey, Mike!" shouted the driver. "You in here?" Out of the shadows of an unfinished building stepped Mike. Jack barely held back a sigh of surprise. He'd never seen the foreman so tense and serious. "Quiet, you idiot," Mike hissed, approaching the truck. "You want them to hear us?" The driver shrugged. "Relax, boss. There's nobody here." Mike looked around, his gaze lingering on Jack's hiding place for a moment, and he felt a chill run down his spine. But Mike didn't seem to notice anything. "All right, let's hurry up," Mike said. "Where are the others?" As if on cue, a group of workers unfamiliar to Jack emerged from around the corner of the building. They moved quickly and in an organized fashion, clearly knowing what to do. "Okay, guys," Mike addressed them. "We've got an hour to unload everything and hide it. We work fast and quiet, understood?" "Yes, boss," the workers replied almost in chorus. They began unloading the truck. Jack, trying not to move, was videotaping everything. He saw large crates being unloaded from the back of the truck, clearly not the usual building materials. "Hey, Mike," one of the workers called out. "What's in these crates? They're pretty damn heavy." Mike threw him a sharp look. "You know less is more, Joe. Just do your job." Joe shrugged and continued unloading. Jack noticed some of the workers exchanging meaningful glances. "Look, Mike," said another worker, an older one. "I don't want any trouble. We're not getting into something illegal, are we?" Mike stepped up close to him. "Listen, Frank, you're getting good money for this job. If there's anything you're not happy with, you can quit right now. But be warned, there's no going back." Frank swallowed and shook his head. "No, boss. It's all right. I was just asking." "That's good," Mike said. "Now get to work." Jack felt his heart pounding frantically. He realized he was witnessing something very serious and dangerous. The unloading continued. Workers were carrying crates into the basement of the unfinished building. Jack noticed that Mike was personally checking each crate before it was carried away. "Careful with that," Mike yelled when one of the workers almost dropped a crate. "If anything gets damaged, we'll be skinned." The worker nodded, his face pale with fear. "Sorry, boss. Won't happen again." Suddenly, one of the crates slipped from the worker's hands and fell to the ground with a clatter. The lid cracked open and Jack saw a glimpse of metal inside. "Shit!" Mike whined, running up to the crate. "Are you guys completely idiots?" He quickly examined the contents of the crate, then exhaled with relief. "Everything seems to be intact. Get this down to the basement quickly and be careful, damn you." Jack tried to get a good look at what was in the crate, but Mike blocked the view. Still, he was pretty sure he saw the weapon. The unloading continued for another half-hour or so. When the last crate was carried into the basement, Mike gathered all the workers together. "Okay, listen up," he said. "You all know the rules. Not a word to anyone about what happened here. If anyone blabs, the consequences will be unpleasant. Understood?" The workers nodded, a mixture of fear and determination on their faces. "Good," Mike continued. "Now split up one at a time, and remember you weren't here today." The workers began to disperse. Jack noticed Mike take the truck driver aside. "Listen, Rick," Mike said quietly. "We've got a problem with this Chen. She's asking too many questions. We need to scare her. You understand?" Rick nodded. "No problem, boss. I'll get on it tomorrow." Jack felt his heart skip a beat. Sarah was in danger. He had to do something. When everyone had dispersed and the construction site fell into silence again, Jack was finally able to emerge from his hiding place. His legs were stiff from sitting in the same position for so long, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. "My God," he whispered, looking up at the dark windows of the unfinished building. "What have I gotten myself into?" He knew he now had proof of illegal activity at the construction site. But he also realized that this information made him a target. Jack pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Emily? Yeah, I know it's late. Look, the situation is more serious than we thought. I need your help." Hanging up the phone, Jack looked back at the construction site once more. He knew tomorrow was going to be a tough day and he had some big decisions to make. But one thing he knew for sure: he couldn't let this lawlessness continue. With those thoughts in mind, Jack headed for his car, trying to move as quietly as possible. The night wasn't over yet, and he had a lot to do before dawn. The next morning, Jack arrived at the construction site earlier than usual. He spotted Sarah studying something in her papers and approached her. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. "May I have a word with you? In private?" Sarah looked at him in surprise but nodded. They stepped aside where no one could overhear them. "Sarah, listen to me carefully," Jack began. "You're in danger. I heard Mike ordering someone to scare you." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and fear. "What? But why? How did you find out about it?" Jack took a deep breath. "I'm not who I say I am. I'm actually—" At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Mike's loud voice. "Hey, you two, stop lounging around. Work awaits." Jack and Sarah quickly separated, but Jack managed to whisper, "I'll meet you after work. I'll explain everything." The day stretched agonizingly slow. Jack tried to behave as usual, but he kept getting suspicious looks from Mike. He noticed that Sarah was also being watched. The same Rick with the tattoo was keeping an eye on her. Toward evening, Jack saw Sarah getting ready to leave. He quickly walked over to her. "Sarah, let me give you a ride," he offered loud enough for those around him to hear. Sarah, remembering their morning conversation, agreed. They got into Jack's car and drove out of the construction site. Jack noticed in the rearview mirror that another car was following them. "Don't turn around," he said quietly to Sarah. "We're being followed. But don't worry, I have a plan." They drove a few blocks, then Jack turned sharply into a narrow alley and stopped. "Quick, get out," he commanded. They jumped out of the car and ran to an inconspicuous door in the wall. Jack quickly opened it with his key and they found themselves inside some kind of office. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, trying to catch her breath. "In a safe place," Jack replied. "Sarah, it's time to tell you the truth. I'm no ordinary laborer. I'm actually Jack Morrison, the owner of the company and this hotel under construction." Sarah stared at him stunned. "What? But why?" Jack sighed. "I suspected something was wrong at the construction site. Decided to do my own investigation, and I turned out to be right. There was something much more serious going on than just a building code violation." He told Sarah everything he'd learned over the days, including the overnight shipment of weapons. Sarah listened to him with growing horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't have imagined." "Sarah, I need your help," Jack said. "You have access to all the project documentation. We need to find evidence of all the irregularities and machinations." Sarah nodded decisively. "I'm with you, Mr. Morrison. What needs to be done?" At that moment, the office door opened and Emily, Jack's wife, walked in. "Jack, thank God you're okay," she rushed over to her husband and hugged him, then turned to Sarah. "You must be Sarah. I'm Emily, Jack's wife. Don't worry, you're safe." Jack explained to Sarah that Emily had been helping him all along, coordinating his actions and gathering information. "We don't have much time," Emily said. "Jack, your disappearance from the construction site must have been noticed by now. We need to act fast." They spent several hours going through the documents Sarah had brought with her and comparing them to the information Jack had gathered. The picture that was emerging was frightening. Mike was not only violating building codes, but he was using the construction site as a front for illegal gun trafficking. "We need to go to the police," Sarah said. Jack shook his head. "Not so fast. Mike clearly has connections in high places. We need to make sure we have enough evidence to stop him." "And what do you suggest?" Emily asked. Jack thought for a moment. "We'll set a trap. Sarah, you said you refused to sign any documents. Call Mike and tell him you've changed your mind and are ready to sign them tomorrow morning." "But why?" Sarah didn't understand. "Because it will give us a chance to catch him red-handed," Jack explained. "I'm sure there's something illegal in those documents. When he comes in with them, we'll be ready." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. They spent all night preparing for tomorrow. Jack contacted his friend at the FBI, explaining the situation and asking for help. In the morning, Sarah returned to the construction site as usual. Jack and Emily were waiting in a nearby hideout, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. FBI agents were also on standby. Mike showed up at Sarah's office with a folder of documents. "Glad you finally came to your senses," he said with a smirk. Sarah tried to remain calm. "Yeah, I thought about it and decided that maybe I was being too principled." She started looking through the documents, pretending to be ready to sign them. Suddenly, the office door swung open and Jack walked in, accompanied by FBI agents. "Game over, Mike," Jack said firmly. Mike turned pale when he saw Jack. "Morrison? But how?" "I've been here the whole time, Mike, watching your dirty deeds," Jack replied. "And now we have all the evidence of your crimes." Mike tried to flee but was quickly captured by the agents. Over the next few hours, arrests and searches were conducted at the construction site. Weapons caches, forged documents, and other evidence of criminal activity were found. When the dust settled, Jack rounded up all the remaining workers. "I know that many of you had no idea what was going on here," he addressed them. "I promise that no innocent person will be harmed. Furthermore, I will personally see to it that this project is completed with integrity and quality." Sarah walked up to him. "Mr. Morrison, I don't know how to thank you. You risked everything to uncover the truth." Jack smiled at Sarah. You don't need to thank me. You risked a lot to do the right thing, too. And please, just call me Jack. In the following weeks, the construction site was an atmosphere of change and renewal. Jack Morrison, now openly acting as the company's owner, personally oversaw the reorganization process. He arrived at the site early each day, ready for new challenges and solutions. Sarah was appointed chief engineer for the project, and Tony, who appeared to be uninvolved in Mike's machinations, was promoted to foreman. One day, as Jack was holding another meeting at the construction site, Tony approached him. "Boss, can I talk to you?" he asked, nervously rubbing his helmet in his hands. "Sure, Tony. What's up?" Jack replied, taking him aside. Tony took a deep breath. "Yeah, I wanted to apologize. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. I should have said something sooner." Jack put a hand on his shoulder. "Tony, it wasn't your fault. Mike created an atmosphere of fear and a lot of people were afraid to speak up. The important thing is that you're doing a great job now." "Thanks, boss," Tony smiled. "You know, now that things have changed, working here has become enjoyable. We feel like we're doing something important." Jack nodded. "That's exactly what I'm aiming for. We're not just building a building, we're creating something meaningful for the community." That evening, Jack met with Sarah in his temporary office at the construction site. They were discussing plans for the next phase of construction when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Jack said. Emily entered the office holding a file folder. "Hello, darling. Oh, hello, Sarah." "Hello, Mrs. Morrison," Sarah greeted her. "Please call me Emily," she smiled. "Jack, I have some news about the investigation." Jack straightened up in his chair. "Something serious?" Emily nodded. "The FBI discovered Mike's ties to a major crime syndicate. It looks like our construction site was just part of a much larger operation." "Oh my God," Sarah exhaled. "So what now?" "Now we have to be even more careful," Jack said. "Emily, have you spoken to our security team?" "Yes, they're stepping up their precautions," Emily replied. "But Jack, there's something else. It looks like someone in the upper management of the company may have been involved in this case." This news silenced everyone. Jack slowly stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the building under construction. "I always knew there was dirt in business," he said quietly. "But I never thought I'd run into something like this in my own company." Sarah walked over to him. "Jack, what are we going to do?" He turned to her and Emily, his face determined. "We're going to go all the way. It doesn't matter who's involved, whether it's a board member or a simple worker. We're going to cleanse this company of corruption." "That could be dangerous," Emily warned. "I know," Jack replied, "but we don't have a choice. We can't let criminals use our business as a cover for their dirty deeds." Over the next few days, Jack, Emily, and Sarah worked almost around the clock, analyzing documents and trying to find connections between the company's management and the crime syndicate. They proceeded cautiously, realizing that any leak of information could scare the criminals away. Jack rubbed his eyes tiredly, looking at his watch. It was well past midnight, but work on the project demanded his attention. Suddenly, he heard a muffled noise coming from the hallway. "That's odd," he thought. "No one should be here at this hour." Cautiously peering out of his office, Jack saw two unfamiliar men rummaging around in Sarah's office. His heart sped up. "Shit," he whispered, pulling out his cell phone. With trembling fingers, he dialed the security number. "Security, how can I help you?" came a sleepy voice through the receiver. "This is Jack Morrison from engineering," Jack whispered. "We have uninvited guests on the 12th floor. 2 men in Sarah Chen's office. It looks like they're looking for something." "Roger that, Mr. Morrison. We'll dispatch a team immediately. Stay where you are and don't draw attention to yourself." Jack glanced at his watch. "Damn, they're not going to make it in time," he thought. "We've got to do something." Taking a deep breath, he decided on a desperate move. "Hey!" shouted Jack, stepping out into the hallway. "What are you doing here?" The men turned around sharply. One of them, a tall, blond man with a scar on his cheek, pulled out a gun. "Don't move," he growled, pointing the weapon at Jack. The second man, a stocky brunette, stepped forward. "Where's the ID?" he asked in a threatening tone. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What papers?" he asked, trying to buy time. "I don't know what you're talking about." The blond man with the scar grinned. "Don't play games with us, smartass. We know you have evidence against our bosses." "I really don't know what you mean," Jack replied, trying to remain calm. "I'm just an engineer. I work on projects, not with some secret documents." The brunette stepped closer, his eyes glittering with anger. "Listen, buddy, we're not messing around. Give us what we're looking for and maybe you'll stay alive." Jack swallowed, feeling his heart ready to jump out of his chest. "Look, guys," he said, trying to sound confident. "Let's discuss this calmly. I'm sure we can find a solution." "Enough talk!" the blond man barked. "We don't have much time. Where are the damn documents?" Jack realized the situation was critical. He slowly raised his hands. All right, he said. "You've got me. The documents are in the safe in my office. I'll open it for you." The criminals looked at each other and nodded. "Lead the way," the brunette said. "And no fooling around, or you're dead." They followed Jack into his office, holding him at gunpoint. Jack was frantically thinking of ways to buy a little more time. "You know," he said, walking slowly toward the safe, "I don't understand why you need these documents. I mean, they're just technical specifications." "Shut up and open the safe," the blond man snarled. Jack stopped in front of the safe. "Listen, guys," he said, turning to them. "Let's have a conversation. I'm sure we can come to an agreement." "What's there to negotiate about?" The brunette grinned. "You give us the paperwork, we leave. It's as simple as that." "What if I told you the documents weren't here?" Jack asked, trying to sound confident. The blond man squinted his eyes. "Then you're in big trouble, buddy." At that moment, footsteps sounded in the hallway. The criminals tensed. "Shit," the brunette hissed. "Who could it be?" "Security, maybe?" the blonde suggested, glancing around nervously. Jack felt a surge of hope. "Look," he said, "you still have a chance to leave. Just put your weapons down and walk away." "Shut up," the blond man barked. "Open the damn safe." Jack slowly turned toward the safe, pretending to enter the code. In reality, he was just pressing random buttons, hoping to buy a little more time. "Hey, what's taking so long?" the brunette asked nervously. "Sorry, I'm a little nervous," Jack replied. "Just give me a minute." At that moment, the office door swung open. "Police! Everybody on the floor!" came a loud voice. The criminals looked confused for a second, and Jack took advantage of that moment. Taking advantage of the criminals' second confusion, Jack turned sharply and lunged at one of them. Security rushed in right behind the police. There was a commotion. Jack felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. One of the bullets had grazed him, but adrenaline kept him going. In a few minutes it was over. The criminals had been neutralized and arrested. Jack, breathing heavily, sank into a chair. "Boss, are you okay?" one of the guards asked. "Yeah, just a scratch," Jack replied, writhing in pain. "Call the police and an ambulance." News of the attack spread quickly. An hour later, Emily and Sarah arrived at the construction site. Emily rushed over to her husband, who was sitting on the couch while a medic treated his wound. "Jack! Oh my God, are you okay?" she exclaimed, hugging him. "I'm fine, honey," Jack reassured her. "Just a little wound." Sarah walked over to them, her face pale with worry. "Jack, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't left the paperwork in the office—" "Sarah, stop it," Jack interrupted her. "It's not your fault. On the contrary, thanks to your work, we now have direct evidence linking the company's management to the criminals." "Now what?" Emily asked, still holding her husband's hand. Jack looked at them both. Now we finish what we started. We're going to expose everyone involved in this case, regardless of their position or influence. He stood up, writhing slightly from the pain in his shoulder. It's not going to be easy. We have a long fight ahead of us. But I believe we can do it, because we have the truth on our side and honest people willing to fight for what's right. Emily and Sarah nodded, their faces expressing determination. They knew there were challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. Walking out of the makeshift infirmary, Jack stopped, looking at the hotel building under construction. Despite all the challenges and dangers, he felt proud. This project had become more than just a business. It had become a symbol of the fight for honesty and justice. Jack stood in front of the unfinished hotel building, his eyes glittering with determination. Emily and Sarah stood beside him, their faces a mixture of worry and hope. Tony and a few other workers gathered behind, waiting for their boss's words. "We're going to finish this hotel," Jack said firmly, his voice sounding confident and inspiring. "And it will become not just a building, but a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, you can stay true to your principles." Emily squeezed her husband's hand. "Jack, are you sure we can do this? After everything that's happened?" Jack turned to his wife, his gaze softening. "Emily, darling, I've never been so sure of anything in my life. Yes, the road will be difficult, but together we can overcome all obstacles." Sarah took a step forward, her voice trembling with excitement. "Jack is right. We can't give up now. There's too much at stake." Tony, standing among the workers, raised his hand. "Boss, can I ask you a question?" Jack nodded. "Sure, Tony. What's bothering you?" Tony shifted nervously from foot to foot. We've all heard about what happened. About the criminals, the corruption. A lot of the guys are afraid we might lose our jobs if the project gets shut down." Jack looked around at the gathered workers, seeing the anxiety and uncertainty on their faces. He took a deep breath and spoke, "I understand your concerns, guys. Believe me, I'm worried about each and every one of you too, but I want you to know that this project will not close. We will continue construction, but now everything will be different, honestly, transparently, without any machinations." One of the workers, an older man named Frank, raised his hand. "What about those who were involved in dirty deeds? Is there room for them too?" Jack shook his head. "Frank, I appreciate your candor. No, those who knowingly participated in criminal schemes won't be able to stay. But I promise that we will look at each case individually. If someone has been forced to participate by pressure or threats, we'll try to find a solution." Sarah added, "And we will increase security measures. No one will be afraid to tell the truth anymore." Emily stepped forward, addressing the workers. "I know many of you don't know me personally. I'm Jack's wife, but I'm also a lawyer. And I promise you that I will personally see to it that every worker's rights are protected." Tony hesitantly raised his hand again. "What about those overnight deliveries? Those weapons that were hidden in the basement?" Jack nodded, realizing the seriousness of the question. "That's a good question, Tony. All weapons and other illegal items have been seized by the FBI. The basement and all the other rooms will be thoroughly checked to make sure there's nothing left behind." The young woman in accounting, Lisa, raised her hand. "Mr. Morrison, what's going to happen to the financial side of the project? After all, there must have been some sort of money manipulation, right?" Jack nodded, recognizing the complexity of the situation. "Yes, Lisa, you're right. The financial side of the project will be completely overhauled. We'll do a full audit to uncover any irregularities. It will take time, but I promise that all paychecks will be paid on time." Emily added, "And we'll hire a new team of financiers and auditors to ensure full transparency of all financial transactions going forward." Sarah looked at the unfinished building and asked, "Jack, what about the project itself? Are we going to be making changes to the building plan?" Jack thought for a moment. That's a good question, Sarah. Yes, we will be revising the project, but not to save money or cut corners. On the contrary, we'll improve it. We'll make the building more environmentally friendly, safer, and more comfortable for future guests. Tony raised his voice again. Boss, can we workers also participate in the discussion about the changes? Many have ideas on how to make the workplace more efficient and safer. Jack smiled, genuinely pleased at the suggestion. Tony, that's a great idea. Yes, of course it is. We'll organize regular meetings where everyone can offer suggestions. Your experience is invaluable, and I want you all to feel a part of this project. Frank, still looking worried, asked, what if trouble starts again? If someone tries to interfere or threaten us? Jack looked him straight in the eye. Frank, I understand your concern, but things will be different now. We have the support of the FBI. We'll beef up security. And most importantly, we have a team of honest, dedicated people. Together, we can stand up to any threat. Emily added, and remember, if any of you face threats or pressure, report it immediately. We will protect you. Sarah raised her hand, drawing attention. I want to add something. As the project's chief engineer, I promise that every aspect of the construction will meet the highest standards of safety and quality. No compromises, no corners cut. Jack nodded, looking at Sarah appreciatively. Thank you, Sarah. Your integrity is exactly what this project needs. Lisa from accounting raised her hand again. What about the company's reputation? After all this scandal. Jack sighed, but his voice remained firm. Yes, Lisa, our reputation has suffered, but you know what? We're going to rebuild it. Not with pretty words and advertising, but with honest work and real deeds. This hotel will be a symbol of our rebirth. Tony suddenly stepped forward. Boss, I want to say, on behalf of all the guys, we're with you. Heck, we're going to build the best hotel in this town. His words were met with cheers and applause. Jack felt a lump come up to his throat. Thanks, guys. Your support, it means more to me than you can imagine. Emily put her arm around her husband's shoulders. See, Jack? You're not alone. You have an army of support. Sarah walked over to them. And we won't stop until we see this thing through, until total victory. Jack looked around at the people gathered, laborers, engineers, office staff. He saw in their eyes determination, hope, and a willingness to fight for what was right. My friends, he began, his voice sounding strong and confident. Today we begin a new chapter, not just in the history of this hotel or our company. We begin a new chapter in the history of honest business in our city. Every brick we lay, every bolt we tighten will be a step toward a better future. A future where honesty and integrity are valued above quick profits. He paused, circling the faces of those gathered. I know the path will not be easy. There will be obstacles. There will be those who will try to thwart us. But together, we are stronger than any obstacles. We will prove that it is possible to do business honestly and successfully. We will build more than just a hotel. We will build a symbol of the triumph of good over corruption and lawlessness. Emily squeezed his hand. And we'll be by your side every step of the way, darling. Sarah nodded. Yes, Jack. We won't back down no matter what happens. Tony shouted out from the crowd, follow the boss into fire or water. Jack smiled, feeling his heart overflow with gratitude and determination. Thank you all. Now let's get to work. We have a hotel to finish. With those words, they headed towards the exit of the construction site. Jack walked in front, Emily and Sarah at his sides, followed by the rest of the team. There was a sense of excitement and determination in the air. As they passed an unfinished building, Jack stopped for a moment. He looked up at the outline of the future hotel looming against the sky. You know, Emily, he said quietly, when I started this project, I thought only of profit and prestige. Now, Now I see it as something more. It's a chance to change something really important." Emily squeezed his hand gently. "You've already made a difference, Jack. You've shown these people what real leadership and integrity means." Sarah, standing next to him, added, "And we're just getting started. Imagine the example we'll set for other companies when we complete this project." Jack nodded, his eyes glistening with excitement and determination. "You're right. This is just the beginning. But what a start." They continued on their way, discussing plans for the near future. There was a lot of work ahead of them, but now they knew that together they could overcome any obstacles. The story wasn't over yet, but they were sure they were writing it in golden letters, letters of honesty, courage, and unwavering faith in their principles.